Elizabeth Weeks Rowe. Last time I met you before today, in person, was like 10 years ago, doing a site selection visit.
I
at one of my
cannot
sites.
forget. Can I tell the story preceding
Tell the
about
story,
that?
yeah.
I had just written my first clinical research novella, self-published
That's right.
on Amazon.
That's right.
And I sought out influencers, and I sent Dan a copy of my book. Do you remember that?
I remember, yeah.
And then a month later,
I read it.
well, you're sweet. I walked in coincidentally, and you were on the couch doing an interview, and I was like, that's Dan Sfera. I sent my book to him, and I introduced myself to you.
Yep.
I did.
And your book was there in my bookshelf.
Oh my gosh, that is so awesome. That was the first book that sold 50 copies. But it was a good experience.
It was your story about, basically it was based on you.
Loosely, yes.
Loosely
based on me, about a coordinator who nurse becomes a coordinator, and the adventures.
So, but in reality, you were a coordinator.
I was.
And you have a lot of experience with sites.
I do. I love sites. Love visiting them.
Love visiting them.
Yes.
As a CRA, you mentor sites.
Yes.
You've been a consultant.
I have.
You've done basically every role in this industry.
Close.
You've written the book on clinical research, like the thick one.
Series guide
The series guide
to monitoring clinical research.
monitoring clinical research. That thing is huge.
Yes.
Sponsored by, or published by Center Watch.
Yes.
Who, I remember reading that and thinking, okay, I need to do something like this, just comprehensive about like everything, but keep it like kind of short.
Your book is awesome. I still have a copy.
Thank you. Yeah, but your book inspired me to write that one.
Wow, thank you.
Because that one came out, like, when did you write that one?
You know, I'm not the original author of the series guide and the PI's guide. The other book is the PI's guide to conducting.
I think I get that one too.
Center Watch first published that book in 2003.
Okay, yeah, because in 05, 06 is when I like started getting this.
And the original author was Dr. Karen Wooden and James someone, and I can't remember his name, James Schneider. And that book helped me pass my ACRP CCRA in 2004.
And now we're back.
Yeah.
Full circle now, ACRP.
And they asked me to start doing the updates in 2016, and I did the updates for the 4th, 5th, and 6th edition. And the 6th edition came out last year, which is my 20th anniversary of my CCRA using it. So that was kind of fun, and it's been a great experience. So.
Full circle.
Yes.
Sites go through a lot, right? Sites, you've seen it as a coordinator, you've seen it as a consultant, you've seen it as a CRA. Sites go through a lot of stuff. What are, like, to outsiders watching, maybe sponsors, like, sponsors don't really know what sites deal with. Sponsors are used to thinking very rigid. We have a protocol, we need this many patients before we can analyze the data and then see how we proceed with this particular compound or IP.
Right.
There's so much more that goes into it, though.
Yes.
There's like people on the other end of this study, not just the patients. I mean, ultimately, yeah, it's for the patients, but the intermediaries, the sites are making it happen. That's where the patients meet indirectly the sponsors vis-a-vis the protocol.
Yeah.
There's a lot there that gets lost in the mix because sponsors typically don't have sites in mind when designing trials. That's been like a constant theme today, interviewing people here, is sponsors are starting to figure this out.
Yeah.
And it's not because they're nice, but I mean, some of them are, but because they need to make it work. They need to figure out how to be site-centric in order to make their trials successful.
I think it's critical to have sites involved with the design and execution, because obviously the execution, but the people executing the protocol know the real world clinically and what happens with the patients versus people who are designing and who've not worked in that. And I think the marriage of the two is brilliant, and I've seen it coming out a little bit more, but if that's a new trend, I think that's going to help with not needing protocol amendments. I mean, no. This is just my opinion, but I'm just saying, like, think about it. A protocol is designed, and then it's executed, but the eligibility criteria is really stringent. Sites can't find patients. There's an amendment based on feedback from investigators. So having that kind of involved at the start might prevent issues later. Just my opinion.
Do you think they're starting to do that, or?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would like to see that happen.
Yeah.
I think sponsors who really value relationships with investigational sites and really cultivate those partnerships do succeed when they have those, pivotal site partnerships.
The workload that a typical CRC undertakes at a site, whether it's 2 studies, whether it's 8 studies, whether they're in charge, I know some coordinators are in charge of 20 studies.
Yeah, I've met coordinators who are on 18 studies, and it's crazy.
What advice do you have to that? Well, first of all, sponsors may be disconnected from this and not understand what that actually means. Being someone that has worked at the site level, that now communicates to sponsors, you communicate to all stakeholders fairly effectively, I think. You're one of the thought leaders in this space.
Thank you for that. I think you are, but anyway.
Thank you. I mean, somebody needs to tell the sponsors, what that actually means. When a coordinator even has, let's say, 8 studies, it's a lot.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean?
I think as a coordinator, I did not have that many studies. I had coworkers who had that many studies, and depending on how many patients are being enrolled, the complexity of the studies, 8 to 10, 12 studies that are complex, that's too much work. It was too much work for some of my colleagues. As a coordinator at the clinic, I think having an open dialogue coming from a CRO or sponsor with the PI about workload. If a coordinator is assigned to too many studies and
Most
their
of the
studies
time,
are,
even the PIs don't understand. They're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, my job is just to CS, NCS labs, make sure eligibility's met, ECGs. They don't know all these portals the coordinators have to mess around with just to get something to work. And I don't think a lot of sponsors do either. I think a lot of sponsors design their trial, then they hire consultants or people who figure out, okay, we need a vendor for this, a vendor for that. They don't realize it all goes back down to the coordinator at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I've said this before and I'll say it again. I think coordinators are some of the most underappreciated members of the investigational site staff.
By far.
They do the hardest job. They have the most work. And I think good CRAs, and I'll say this too, the CRA and the coordinator relationship is interdependent, and they have to have a partnership because they collaborate. No one is subordinate. I remember when I was a coordinator, I had CRAs who trained me, worked with me, and it was amazing. And I had CRAs who intimidated me. And the most success was gleaned from the relationship where there was respect, transparency, and the interdependency was recognized and promoted. It has to be a collaboration. And then the bigger picture, I think, when you have the sponsor CRO site partnerships, a true partnership, the trials are more successful as well. Just my humble opinion.
The trials are definitely more successful,
Yeah.
especially when you have the engaged coordinators
Yes.
willing to go out of their way, because it's not easy to get a patient randomized.
No.
Especially when the coordinator's payment is not always connected to randomizations or outcomes.
I'm lucky that I'm never involved with the financial part, so I can't speak to that. I know you guys, don't you guys have, sorry, I'm changing the subject.
No.
Don't you guys have Daniel, one of your partners has a CR?
Oh, Chris Sauber.
Yes,
Chris
yes.
does, so with DSCS, we can negotiate sites contracts,
Yeah.
and budgets, and all those things.
Yeah. I haven't had to work in the financial part, which is probably good for everybody.
Well, the point is that coordinators, they don't really get rewarded for working hard. So you see this at a lot of academic medical centers where if a patient's on the fence to randomize and it takes just a little more work to get them in, if there's no tied incentives, the coordinator generally will say, well, we'll move on to the next one. This is a screen failure.
Right, yeah.
Right? Whereas the sites that kind of manage that process properly or tie in incentives, they'll facilitate going the extra mile to get the patient in.
Yeah.
Or filing that waiver for out of window
Yeah.
randomization, right?
Yeah.
Rather than just the default being, nope, screen fail.
There's a question I always wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
How many coordinators work for you?
Right now, 5 starting Monday. Monday is our 5th one starting.
Did your staff, when you moved, am I allowed to ask you about
Yeah.
moving? Did your staff, when you moved to Yuma, come with you?
No.
Oh.
These are all local products from Yuma. No one wanted to move. Monica, who you met
Yes.
at Global Clinical
Yeah.
Trials, which was my previous site, she went and started her own site in LA.
Oh.
So she's got Clarity Clinical Research. She'll be at the after party event later today, so we'll do interviews with her.
Okay.
Psychiatric trials.
Good for
over
her.
there.
That's awesome. I always
And-
wanted to ask you that because when you said you were moving to Yuma, I thought, I wonder if he's gonna be
Nah,
able
no
to
one wanted
entice
to.
anybody to go to Yuma. No, Yuma's
No one
good.
wanted to follow me to
I've been to
Yuma.
Yuma, believe it or not.
Yeah?
Yeah, I had a friend who was a flight surgeon for a Navy flight surgeon for a Marine Air Unit, and she was based there, and I went out there. That's another thing.
No,
but
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I've been to
hopefully
Yuma,
you come
believe
back
it or not.
and we could do a podcast there too.
I would love
Give you a
that.
tour
I
of
would
the
love
site
to.
and
When I was a
everything.
consultant, I wanted to call you and say, "Can I come visit your site?"
Anytime,
But
yeah.
maybe.
Come anytime you need to. Like our site is kind of like a playground for tech vendors, sponsors. I was telling Creo earlier, whenever you hire new staff, bring them here, let them shadow. Let
Like a
them,
training ground.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yuma proving ground. Yeah.
It's
But the CRA-CRC relationship, right, interaction, I've interviewed here today sisters, one CRC, one CRA.
yeah.
The CRAs especially, so overworked, especially at the CRO level. What are your thoughts on this?
That's a hard question because some organizations, I mean, you can have two CRAs working within the same organization and one has a manageable workload and one doesn't. I
Right.
think it honestly comes down to the CRA manager. Because if the CRA manager is handling the resourcing or the resourcing department is working with the CRA manager, of course, enough CRAs play into it as well. But when I worked for different CROs, my workload was manageable. I had really good CRA managers. I think that's a key aspect because you can't just plug holes with your fingers, right? And if there's a
Right.
leak, I mean, it
It's
comes
a
down to
sinking
manageable
ship.
workload, and that's just what I think. So I've been very fortunate with really good CRA managers in my career. So
Yeah, and there's so much like good talent even at the CRO levels that
yeah,
are, I think, underappreciated, and especially now like the recent round of layoffs it's pretty well known now amongst the CROs.
it's a crazy time right now.
It is very
I
crazy.
don't remember
'cause
this since
sites are busy
2008.
since '08. Yeah. Does this remind you of '08 or no?
Yeah, it does, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, except I think in '08 what I saw was it wasn't just affecting the industry side, it was affecting like huge site organizations
Yeah, it was affecting
closing.
sites. Yeah.
And right now it seems like it's affecting the industry side, certain companies, but not sites.
Not site. Not.
Sites are so busy, which is great for sites,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's good opportunity for a lot of these maybe CRAs or CTAs or whatever that have been part of the recent round of layoffs to
Yeah.
get at the site level. And maybe it'll make them better in their next role at the CRO or sponsor side to have that site level experience like you did.
Or didn't you mention, didn't you do a podcast on if the CRAs want to get interested in owning sites?
Yes.
I want to see that podcast. I saw it advertised, but I didn't see it. That would be interesting. I met a site owner once who was a CRA before, and I keep moving. Sorry, guys, I'm a mover. I can't help it. When I speak, I'm all over
It's a
the
lot
place.
of energy.
I know. I'm so hyper today.
Yeah.
I once did a site evaluation visit a couple years ago. The site owner was a CRA, and he had been a
There's a lot
coordinator.
of that.
And he that full dimensional experience really helped his, like he knew how to speak to the sponsor. He knew how to speak to his staff.
Yeah.
He was a good business person.
Yep.
It was like the perfect trifecta. So
There's a lot I still encourage if you're curious about that and you are a CRA and you've never had site level experience to still work at a site first before
Yeah.
you jump. Having a site's a huge commitment. You could lose a lot of money if you don't know what you're doing.
yeah,
But if you do know what you're doing, it's very rewarding. And I mean, in less than 3 years at Yuma Clinical Trials, we've done really well, but that's only because of my previous experiences and
experience.
failures. I've made plenty of mistakes along
Yeah,
the
but
way.
weren't you working as a CRA purposefully?
I was a contract CRA
Yeah,
for a while.
just keep
Yeah.
yourself in.
Yep,
And see, that's
yep.
great. You can become so siloed. If you're a
Yes.
site owner, you're concerned with finances and business development, and then
Be
you
a
lose
generalist.
touch. Yes.
This is what I think you're really good at, this, being a generalist. Like anyone who wants to connect with Elizabeth, her LinkedIn's underneath. You've really done it all in this space.
You could say that's because I have short attention span. No, I thirst for knowledge and understanding, and I've been able to work in clinical research in different positions. Yeah, I like being a generalist. I really do.
Yep, I think it's beneficial for you. I think it's beneficial for the industry because you can take what you know and what you've learned from previous stakeholders to your new destination.
Yeah, very true.
And whether that's working for yourself or working for someone else.
Yeah, very true.
And there's a bunch of tech vendors in the space too that are popping up. I mean, if you just look around,
Yeah.
I think 80% of these companies are tech vendors.
Yeah,
And guess what? A lot of them are lacking site and CRA expertise.
yeah. I can see CRAs transitioning into a tech type position,
Me too.
but I would not see as easily a tech engineer, IT person
Nope.
transitioning into a clinical position.
Nope.
So, interesting.
So if you've just been laid off, like I'm trying to give encouragement to you guys, there's
Yeah.
a lot of companies, maybe unorthodox companies that you haven't thought of that would love your expertise. So don't give up. Network, come to conferences like this.
Yeah.
SOS, go to webinars like online, Latinos in Clinical Research. There's free things you can do. There's paid conferences if you have some money.
You guys do a lot for people who like what to do if you get laid off, networking. You
We
guys,
try,
yeah.
yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
great.
I think
it's
we owe it to
important.
the industry and ultimately reciprocity, it comes back.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I agree.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I really appreciate this.
Oh, it's so nice to see you. Thank you for
In
having me. I'm so
person,
excited.
too.
It hasn't been 3 years. Remember, we did your podcast and I hadn't talked to you in 4 years.
4 years,
Yeah.
yeah, and that was on
Dan's
Zoom.
like, what? We just talked. I'm like, no, we didn't.
But now we'll see you next year at SOS.
Yes, I will be there. Absolutely.
We'll have you on a panel or something. We got to do
I would
something.
love that.
Yeah.
Seriously, I
We
would
gotta
love
figure
that.
it out.
Yeah.
Thank you. Everybody go connect with Elizabeth.